If you've ever seen that dynamic creative toggle when you're setting up your Facebook ad campaign and wasn't really sure what it was and was scared to turn it on, in this video, I'm going to tell you the exact differences between a dynamic creative Facebook ad campaign and a regular classic way of creating a Facebook ad sales campaign. I'm going to first bring you through the visual differences, like what it actually looks like between two different setups, for one for dynamic creative and one for a regular campaign. I'm going to show you how you can turn on dynamic creative, what it does. At the ad level is mostly where those changes are. So I'm going to bring you through all of those different changes, who should be using dynamic creative, and when you might want to use a regular sales campaign. And then finally, a few pros and cons about using each of the two different ways of setting up your campaign. So let's dive right into a demo Facebook ad account. I've opened up two separate setups for two different campaigns inside of a demo Facebook ad account. One is a dynamic creative sales campaign, and one is just a regular setup that you might typically use and that you might be used to. So I'm gonna show you first the visual differences between the two. So if we kind of scroll down, this is the campaign level. After I've pressed that big green button, this is what it opens up to. If we compare these two, they're pretty much the exact same. You have all the same options. You have the option to turn on Advantage Campaign Budget, which is essentially campaign budget optimization, and everything looks the exact same on the campaign level. Let's then go to the ad set level, and this is where you would be able to turn on your dynamic creative campaign. So let's continue to scroll down. Again, everything here is still the exact same. Let me just make these the same type of campaign objectives, just so they look visually the same. Right here is where we can turn on dynamic creative. Now, dynamic creative takes multiple different types of media, so images, videos, and multiple ad components like the video, the image, the text, and even some call to actions, and then they mix and match them in new ways to improve your ad performance. It allows you to automatically create personalized creative variations for each individual person who views your ads, with results that are scalable and what Facebook thinks is most likely to give you the best results. So if you do turn this option on right over here, that is the setting that you're gonna want to turn on if you want to use dynamic creative. And then again, we come down here and there are really no differences whatsoever, and even all of the placements are the same. Let's then go down to the ad level. This is dynamic creative and this is a regular campaign. Okay, so we still have the same options to choose, a Facebook and Instagram page. In both cases, we have the option to manually upload, but in a dynamic creative, we don't have the option to select the catalog option because we have a dynamic creative selected. Whereas in a regular sales campaign, you can choose the catalog and choose what products that you want to advertise. So that's one thing that is different. We can't choose single image or video, carousel, and in a dynamic creative, you cannot choose a collection like a mobile experience. So if you ever use that, you can't use that in a regular dynamic creative. Now, the real differences come down here when you go and select your ad creative. So in a dynamic creative, like I said, you can give Facebook a bunch of different options of images, videos, and text, and they'll choose the best variation for a given person to take a look at and optimize based on what they would prefer to see. So in a dynamic creative campaign, you can have up to 10 different creatives that you can cycle through and give Facebook those options. Whereas in a regular campaign, you can only have one. So you need to choose one ad and then add your copy and your headlines and primary text to that one ad. Whereas in a dynamic creative, you can have a bunch of different copy, a bunch of different headlines, and a bunch of different images, and that variation will be chosen by Facebook. Now, there is this feature for a regular campaign, and you can optimize your text per person. And this gives you the option to give multiple different primary text, headlines, and even descriptions, just like you can in a dynamic creative, and it'll optimize based on a given person. It's not always available in your regular campaign setup if you add these different options. I've seen it be available, and you can see the breakdown for purchases and reach and add to carts and everything for a specific ad. You could use the breakdown feature and then see each of those elements for the primary text and which one performed best, but that's not always available. And the only time I have seen it available is for accounts who are spending upwards of at least $50,000 per month. And even then, that feature is not available on every single month. I think it is a little bit budget dependent. Whereas for a dynamic creative, you will always get the breakdown feature for how well each of these headlines and primary text are performing based on reach and purchases and any other metric for the most part. So that's what I do like about dynamic creative, whereas it's not always available in your regular campaign setup if you add multiple options. Now, some best practices, even if you are to use a regular ad setup, is that I would still recommend you adding at least 2 to 3 different primary text and headlines and enabling the optimized text per person so that Facebook can show different variations to each person depending on what they would prefer to see. If you only have one primary text and one headline, although, that is one combination of ads, it's not really giving Facebook, a few different options. And ideally, if you want your ad to last as long as possible, you give it a few more variations than just one. And the same rule sort of goes for the dynamic creative. I always recommend adding up to 2 to 3 different creatives. I wouldn't really go more than that because I think quality is more important than quantity, and that actually is one of the best practices for Facebook ads, which I will have another video on. And even for the primary text and headlines, adding 2 to 3 different options would be best practice and gives Facebook as many options as possible to show your ad and get you the best results for it to optimize. And aside from that, that's really how these two campaigns differ. And like I said, when it comes to analyzing the results, the breakdown feature is not always available for the regular campaign, but for a dynamic creative, for the most part, it is always available for you to see. So let me now go show you what it looks like to have a campaign that has dynamic creative and the breakdown feature versus not having the breakdown feature because it's just a regular campaign. All right, so this right here is a campaign that has dynamic creative turned on. If I go in the corner here, I use the breakdown. We have the option by dynamic creative element, and then we have image, video, and slideshow, website URL, text, headline, description, call to action. For the most part, the only things I'm going to be adding as like different things in here are going to be the images, video, and slideshow, text, and then headlines. I'm not often testing out different call to actions. I'm either using Learn More or Shop Now, depending on what objective I'm using. So I'm not really testing out those different options. So let's first go see what the image, video, and slideshow breakdown looks like. First thing that you'll notice is that there's a lot of different options here. Even though it's the same video, there's cropped, like these videos get cropped to a certain size depending on where they're going to be placed. So even though I only had about 4 videos in this dynamic creative campaign, they're showing like 15 different options here because they've cropped it based on the placement. So that's kind of one thing that's a little bit kind of confusing, or looks like your results are skewed a little bit for one placement versus another, whereas they wouldn't have that in a regular campaign. But aside from that, what I love is that you can actually see the results, the amount of purchases, and more importantly, especially for on Facebook metrics, is the reach and impressions for a given ad and even its placement. So from here, I can see that actually this ad is performing best. It has the most amount spent. It has the biggest reach compared to all of the other ads. The cost per result is pretty much the lowest aside from the one that has like one purchase on there. And so I know that this ad right here is performing the best, and I can see all of the metrics that are being broken down, and they're even giving us the return on ad spend, which in just a second I will show you what that difference looks like in a regular campaign. I'm getting each of those individual breakdowns. I can also see the text breakdown, which is a really cool feature, and you can see based on the amount of reach, the results, cost per result, and the ROAS, this copy right here is currently performing best. This one's also performing pretty well down here. And then you'll also see what shows up in your text option. If you have the optimized text per person, your headlines might show up in the primary text place if they think that will perform well. So even though I only had 4 different primary text options, I'm seeing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 options because they use some headlines in my primary text placement in some cases. But see that those ones didn't really get as great of results. So now let's go see another campaign that has a regular setup and then see what that breakdown feature looks like. All right, so this right here is just a regular campaign, and you'll see that when I kind of dive in here right away, there is multiple different ads, and we have the turn on off button for every single ad that I have in here. Every single one of these ads then have their own primary text and their own headlines. While in a lot of them they are pretty similar, they each have their own individual ads versus one sort of ad where you have 3 or 4 different images in that one ad. So in a dynamic creative, I would just have that one option up here, and now we see all of them. And here we also do get the breakdown between like the amount spent, reach, results that it's getting. So if I use the breakdown feature and I go by dynamic creative element, and this is an option only because I had optimized text per person turned on. So you do want to make sure you have that on to enable this option right here. And I can go text and I can see the breakdown between all of the text options that I have inside of that each individual ad. Okay, so that's pretty cool, and I can see the breakdown here. So in the last account I just had open, they're spending around $50,000 per month on their Facebook ads, and so that's why they have the option to use that breakdown feature. Now in this account, we're spending about $5,000 per month. It is a little bit of a smaller account, and unfortunately in this case, we don't have the option to use the breakdown feature. Even though I have all of the same settings turned on for this campaign, I still have 3 or 4 different options for primary text and headlines. I don't have the option to break it down, and I don't know exactly why. And it's telling me that it's only available for ads that are using dynamic creative. But even in that last ad account that I just showed you, we're not using dynamic creative, and that breakdown feature is still there. So it depends on kind of how much you're spending. And even that last ad account, it's not always available. It's not always there. So it's kind of sometimes there, depending on how much you're spending is what I'm kind of getting to. I'm pretty sure that's the reason. So that's the kind of caveat. If you're spending a lower budget and you're trying to see what copy is performing best for your ads, then I would recommend using dynamic creative and getting that breakdown feature. Okay, so we're back in the demo Facebook ad account, and one thing that I did notice about adding new ads to your dynamic creative. So let's say you have a testing campaign, which I would recommend. We have other videos if you're not sure about testing your ads, but you have a separate campaign for testing your Facebook ads. You then find the best variation of headline, copy, and text, and you want to add that to your core campaign. That should be essentially the way that you're doing it. If you want to add a new ad in here, unfortunately, you can't just duplicate this creative and add some more ads in like you might typically be able to with your regular ad setup. So in a regular ad setup, if you have a new creative you want to add in, I would just duplicate it, change the image, change the copy, and then publish it nice and easy. So for a dynamic creative, because we're using dynamic creative, we need to duplicate the entire ad set. So there would then be 2 ad sets here, each containing one dynamic creative, and a dynamic creative can have up to 10 different images, up to 5 primary text, and headline. Now, the other option would be that if you have the winning creative, you want to add it into your dynamic creative, you could just go in and add your image here and add your new text here and then publish that and just add a new ad in there. And I think that's perfectly fine because all the data will still be there. Now, what I found to be an issue is when you have an ad inside of your dynamic creative that you notice is not performing well, I sort of have an issue with just removing that ad because then it will no longer be there. And ideally, what you're doing with your ad account is learning all of the time. And you can look back on it 6 months, a year, even 2 years from now, especially if you're working with different agencies or hiring different people to work with you. They want to be able to look back at your data and see what performed well and what didn't. So with a dynamic creative, if you want to remove an ad, in that case, I would then duplicate the entire ad set. But I also don't like having the need to duplicate an entire ad set to change up one ad. So that's kind of an issue that I've been finding with using dynamic creative. Whereas just for a regular campaign, I can go in there, duplicate the ad, change all the creative, and then publish it. And if I want to turn something off, I just turn off that button. That's kind of the caveat to using dynamic creative. When it comes to removing an ad, I don't want to delete the past data. So you need to duplicate the entire ad set. I would say one of the main pros when it comes to your dynamic creative is that I find I can just let that campaign run for longer than just a regular ad. Because you're giving so many different permutations to Facebook to optimize based on a person, there's just so many different options, and like that ad can continue to run for a pretty long time, and you can continue to use that breakdown feature and just see what's performing well and what's not. Whereas if you have just a regular ad campaign running, there might be one ad that's just not performing well, and you might feel the need to like turn it off, go in there and optimize. Whereas I almost feel like I need to optimize less with a dynamic creative. Now, there's a certain place that I would recommend using dynamic creative versus just a regular campaign, and that would be for a campaign that you know has creatives that already works well. I did make a video a while ago about using dynamic creative for testing your ads, and I think that has a place in its own if you're just using it with the intention of testing. But as a core campaign, if you're going to be adding in and removing, I'd recommend using ads that you know already perform well with copy you already know performs well, and then giving Facebook all of your best options. Quality over quantity is huge. And so the best place that I would recommend using your dynamic creative is as a core campaign with creatives that you know already work well, versus adding some like not so good and some good in there and hoping that Facebook will optimize for you. Then that's when we run into the problem of, you know, do I remove the ad? Do I just add one in there? And then you need to duplicate an ad set and all that. So I think it does come down a little bit to preference and what you prefer to use. I think if you have a hold on one of the different options, try testing out the other. I also just kind of feel like there's more content on YouTube about using a regular ad campaign, and that's why not a lot of people are using dynamic creative, but it can be super powerful, especially if you're like looking to scale with creatives that you know already work really well because you're giving it so many different permutations. I hope today I visually kind of explained what the differences are between a dynamic creative and a regular sales campaign. The place where you can go to turn it on visually inside of your ads manager, and you know, in some cases where you might want to use dynamic creative versus just using a regular sales campaign. At the end of the day, you're most likely going to end up with similar results, and we've done some tests to see which option was best or got better results, and I didn't find that there was a huge statistical significance between the two. It kind of just came down to preference. I guess the issue came to when you wanted to add new ads in or remove them. That's when you kind of had to do a little bit more research and understand what you're doing. So I think it's just personal preference and your level of knowledge when it comes to Facebook ads and what you're willing to learn more about. That's it for today's video. I just kind of wanted to explain that to you guys at a pretty high level. If you have any questions about what I meant or you're not really sure, drop a comment in the comment section below and I can get back to you. And if not, don't forget to hit subscribe, hit that like button if you found value, and let me know what you prefer. Do you prefer dynamic creative or just a regular campaign on Facebook? Let me know and I'd be happy to hear your thoughts. That's it for today's video, and I will see you in the next one.